The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was still in my bathrobe, drinking coffee and watching the birds at my feeder. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked up anyway. I always do. You never know at my age. Mom. It was my son. His voice had that flat, rehearsed quality I'd learned to dread over the past few years, the voice he used when he'd already decided something and just needed to inform me of it. I need you to listen and not interrupt. I set down my mug. Cheryl and I got married last Saturday. Private ceremony, just us. And I know you're going to be upset, but here's the thing, we had to move fast because of the venue deposit, and I borrowed the money to cover everything. From your savings account? I had your banking info from when I helped you set up online access, remember? $54,000. I'll pay you back. But I also want you to know we're moving into a bigger place and we're going to need the house appraised because Cheryl thinks the equity could help us. Stop, I said. Mom, I said stop. There was a pause. Then he said, I knew you'd react like this. I hung up. I sat there for a long time. The birds kept coming to the feeder. A cardinal, 2 sparrows. Life going on completely normally outside my window while something inside my chest cracked open like old timber. $54,000. That was 22 years of putting aside whatever I could after paying the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries, the vet bills, the property taxes. 22 years since my husband Walter died and left me with a 12-year-old son. A house that needed a new roof and a job as a school librarian that I loved but that did not love me back in terms of salary. $54,000 was not a fortune. But it was mine, and it was supposed to keep me steady through whatever came next. A health scare? A car replacement? The slow, uncertain slide of getting older without a partner to catch me if I fell. My son knew all of that. He had watched me build it. His name is Kevin. He's 34 years old. And until about 2 years ago, I thought I knew him. I want to be honest with you about the kind of mother I was, because I think it matters. I was not a perfect mother. I lost my temper sometimes. I worked too many hours when Kevin was in middle school, and I missed things I shouldn't have missed. After Walter died, I went through a long stretch where I was just surviving, going through the motions, keeping the lights on, trying not to let Kevin see how close to the edge I was. But I loved that boy with everything I had. I showed up to every school event I could. I helped him with applications, co-signed his first apartment lease, lent him money when he needed it, and he always paid me back in those early years. He was a good kid. Reliable. Honest, I thought. Then he met Cheryl. I want to be fair here because I know how it sounds when a mother-in-law starts talking about her son's wife. I know the cliches. I have been conscious since the beginning of trying not to be that woman. The one who can't let go, who finds fault with every girlfriend, who poisons her son against the women he chooses. So when Kevin first brought Cheryl home for Thanksgiving 3 years ago, I tried. I genuinely tried. She was polished in a way that made me feel clumsy in my own kitchen. 30 years old, worked in real estate, had opinions about everything that she delivered as facts. She complimented my house with a particular kind of smile, the kind that is really an appraisal. This neighborhood has really held its value, she told me, while she helped herself to a second glass of my wine without asking. You'd be surprised what these lots are going for now. I thanked her and changed the subject. Over the next 2 years, I watched my son change. Slowly, and then all at once, the way things do. He stopped calling just to talk. Our conversations became transactional, scheduling visits, updating me on logistics. When I tried to share something about my own life, something small, I could hear him losing interest before I was even finished. He stopped coming to Sunday dinners. Then he stopped coming at all unless Cheryl was with him, and Cheryl only came when she wanted something. The last time I'd seen them together before the phone call was in October. They'd driven out to have lunch with me, and Cheryl spent most of the meal asking me very specific questions about my house. Had I refinanced? Did I have a mortgage still? Had I ever considered a reverse mortgage? What did I think the square footage was? I answered her questions politely and tried to redirect us toward conversation, and on the drive out afterward, I told myself I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. After I hung up the phone that Tuesday morning, I sat very still for about an hour. Then I went to my computer and I logged into my bank account. The money was gone. Not all of it, but almost. $54,220 in a series of withdrawals over the previous 12 days. The largest was $30,000, transferred out in the single transaction. The rest came out in smaller amounts, $8,000, $7,000, $6,000, $3,000. Structured carefully, I would later learn to avoid certain automatic flags. My son had not borrowed money from my savings account. He had drained it. I called my bank. I was on hold for 22 minutes. When I finally spoke to someone, a young man who was very kind and very sorry, he told me that the transactions had been authorized through my online banking profile. I asked him to flag the account and place a hold on any further activity. He did. He also gave me the number for their fraud department and told me to contact local law enforcement. I wrote down the numbers. I thanked him. I hung up. Then I went to my bedroom closet and I took down the metal lockbox from the shelf behind my winter coats. Inside the lockbox was a manila envelope. Inside the envelope were documents I had not looked at in over a decade. Copies of my original mortgage, the deed to my house, and a revocable living trust that Walter and I had set up together in 2004, 18 months before he died. A trust that Walter had quietly updated 3 months before his death, on the advice of his attorney after he was diagnosed. A trust that made certain provisions about the property that my son, apparently, did not know existed. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I held those papers in my hands for a long time. And then, I am not proud of this, but I am telling you the truth. I laughed. It was not a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out of you when the alternative is collapsing. But it was real, because in the middle of all of it, in the wreckage of my savings and my trust and 22 years of believing I knew my child, there was this one thing. This one thing Walter had done all those years ago that neither Kevin nor Cheryl had known to look for. The house was not mine to lose, not in the way they thought. Let me explain what a living trust is, because when Walter first suggested it, I had no idea either. A revocable living trust means that your property, your house, your accounts, whatever you choose to put into it, is technically held by the trust, not by you personally. You're the trustee, so you control it completely while you're alive and capable. But the property doesn't go through probate when you die, and it can have built-in protections that a simple will doesn't have. Walter's attorney had put specific language into our trust, language that said the property could not be sold, refinanced, or transferred without the signature of both trustees, and that in the event one trustee was incapacitated or deceased, the successor trustee, our friend and neighbor Helen, would need to co-sign any major transaction. Walter had done this because he was a careful man, because he'd seen what happened to his own mother after his father died, the relatives who circled, the pressure, the confusion. He had looked at me, his wife, 39 years old, with a young son and no financial background to speak of, and he had quietly built a fence around the thing that would keep me safe. He never made a big thing of it. He just told me the house was protected and that I should keep those papers somewhere I could find them. He showed me the lockbox. He said, if anyone ever tries to tell you that you have to sign something about the house, you call Helen first. Don't sign anything. Call Helen. I had not thought about that instruction in years. I thought about it now. I called Helen before I called anyone else. Helen is 71 and a retired paralegal, and she has been my neighbor and friend since 1997. She answered on the second ring, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do not touch anything. Do not respond to Kevin. Come over here right now." I went over in my bathrobe. Helen read through the trust documents at her kitchen table while I sat there with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that I couldn't taste. She read carefully and slowly, and she made notes in the margins of a legal pad. When she was done, she looked up at me. "He can't sell the house," she said. "He's not on the trust, he has no authority over it, and the deed is titled to the trust." Whatever he told the real estate contact, it went nowhere. No legitimate title company would close on this property without pulling the deed first. If someone tried to process this without your signature in mind, they'd hit a wall. "What about the money?" I asked. Helen put her pen down. "That's different," she said. "That money is gone, and it's going to be a harder road to get it back. But you need to report it today, not tomorrow, today." I reported it that afternoon. The detective who took my report was a woman about my daughter-in-law's age, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a manner that was brisk but not unkind. She told me that what my son had done, using authorized banking credentials to transfer money without consent, occupied a complicated legal space because he had technically been given access to my account years ago for an entirely different purpose. "Did you ever give him written authorization to make withdrawals?" she asked. "No. I gave him my login so he could help me when I didn't understand the interface, to check my balance, to walk me through updating my password." She nodded and wrote something down. "We'll look at the structured nature of the withdrawals," she said. "The pattern matters. Intent matters. I won't tell you this is going to be fast or simple, but what you're describing is elder financial abuse, and that is taken seriously here." Elder financial abuse. I had heard those words before in the context of news stories and public service announcements in the abstract world of things that happen to other people. Hearing them applied to my own situation, to Kevin, my Kevin, the boy I had raised, was something I couldn't quite absorb. I sat in that police station feeling very far away from myself, nodding at the right moments, signing the forms she pushed toward me. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bed in the dark, and I went back through every memory I had of the past 2 years, looking for signs I had missed or explained away. The questions Cheryl asked about the property, the way Kevin had stopped correcting her when she talked about their options for my house as if it were already a resource they were entitled to draw on. The phone call 18 months ago when Kevin asked if I had a will and I said yes, and he asked who the executor was, and something about the way he asked made me change the subject. I thought about the version of my son I had been protecting in my mind, the 12-year-old at his father's funeral, who held my hand so tightly I could feel every bone in his small fingers, who told me not to cry. "Mom, it's okay. I've got you." I had been holding on to that child for 34 years, and I had let that love blind me to who he had gradually become. That was the hardest part. Not the money. Not even the house. It was the understanding that I had known. Somewhere I didn't want to look, and I had chosen not to. 3 days after I made my report, Kevin called again. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message saying that I was overreacting, that he'd always intended to pay me back, that I needed to understand the pressure he was under, and that Cheryl's family was willing to help cover part of what he owed if I would just, and here his voice shifted to something almost threatening, cooperate with the process. I listened to the message once. Then I forwarded it to the detective. She called me an hour later and said, "This is helpful." 2 weeks after that, Kevin was charged with financial exploitation of an elder. In our state, that's a felony if the amount exceeds a certain threshold. $54,000 exceeded it comfortably. Cheryl was not charged. Not initially. Not with the evidence available at that point, but the detective told me the investigation was ongoing and that certain financial records they had subpoenaed told an interesting story about who had done what research and when. I did not feel triumphant when I heard this. I want to be honest about that. There's a version of this story where the wronged mother gets the news and feels vindicated, satisfied, whole. That is not what I felt. What I felt was a grief so heavy it had a physical weight, pressing on my chest when I woke up in the morning and still there when I tried to sleep at night. My son had done this. But I did not drop the charges. My friend Helen told me not to, and she was right. My attorney, whom I hired 2 weeks in, a woman named Barbara who specialized in elder law and had seen 100 versions of this story, told me not to. And somewhere underneath the grief, I knew it too. Because the moment you decide your love for someone means they don't have to be accountable, you have handed them permission to do it again. To you or to someone else. I loved my son too much to hand him that permission. Cheryl filed for divorce 6 weeks after the charges were filed. I heard this from Kevin, who called me from his attorney's office, which I thought was a strange place to call your mother from, but his attorney had apparently told him that keeping some kind of communication open with me was in his interest. Kevin cried on the phone. He told me that Cheryl had only stayed as long as she did because she believed the house could be accessed and that when the title search came back clean in the trust's name, her interest in the marriage had evaporated almost immediately. I did not say I told you so. What would have been the point? I asked him instead a question that had been sitting in me for months. Kevin, do you remember when I helped you move into your first apartment? That summer after your sophomore year? You were so proud of that place. You didn't have much furniture. You had that orange secondhand couch and a card table. And you cooked pasta for me on a hot plate because the stove wasn't working yet. He was quiet. Then, very quietly, I remember. That's who I raised, I said. That person is still in there somewhere. And whatever you decide to do with the rest of your life, that's up to you. But I am not going to pretend what happened didn't happen. And I am not going to let it keep happening. I heard him crying harder. I didn't hang up, but I didn't comfort him either. I just sat on the line and let the silence hold us both for a moment before I said goodbye. The legal process took 14 months. Kevin ultimately took a plea agreement, 2 years of supervised probation, mandatory financial counseling, community service, and a civil restitution order requiring him to pay back the $54,000 over 5 years. No prison time, which his attorney negotiated based on his clean prior record and what they described as his genuine remorse. I was asked whether I agreed to the terms. I told Barbara that I wanted the restitution. Beyond that, I stayed out of it. It was not my job to determine his punishment. That was for the court. I have received 9 restitution payments so far. He has not missed one. Whether that means something? I'm still deciding. I want to tell you about the thing I did not expect, which is that going through something like this changes the way you see your own life. Not just the hard parts of it, but everything. In the months that followed, I began to do things I had put off for years. I finally updated the trust to reflect current asset values and added a durable power of attorney for healthcare with clear, explicit limitations. I opened a separate account at a different bank, one that Kevin had never had access to, and I set up automatic transfers from my monthly pension. I changed every password I had. These were practical things, necessary things. But they weren't the most important change. The most important change was that I stopped being ashamed. I had been ashamed, I realized, for a long time, even before any of this happened. Ashamed of being alone at 63. Ashamed of being the woman whose son didn't call. Ashamed that my family didn't look the way I had imagined it would at this stage. And that shame, that quiet, corrosive shame, had made me easier to miss things. It had made me want to believe the best so badly that I sometimes refused to see what was right in front of me. I started attending a community group at my church for older adults who had experienced financial exploitation, which sounds like a very grim way to spend a Tuesday evening, and sometimes it is. But there is also something that happens in a room full of people who understand exactly what you're talking about without you having to explain it. I started sleeping better. I started calling friends I'd let drift. I started having Helen over for dinner more regularly because she's one of the best people I know and I had been taking her quietly for granted. I planted a vegetable garden this spring, which I had been meaning to do for 15 years. Walter would have loved that garden. He used to grow tomatoes in big clay pots on the back porch, the kind that got so ripe they'd split open if you didn't pick them in time. I think about him a lot when I'm out there in the mornings before it gets hot. I think about the way he sat with me at that kitchen table all those years ago and walked me through the trust documents and said, in the way he said things, quietly, without drama, "This house will always be yours. I'm going to make sure of it." He kept that promise. Even from where he is, Kevin and I are in contact. It is careful contact. Monthly calls, careful, a little formal still. We are not close. I don't know if we will ever be what I thought we were or if what I thought we were was real to begin with. That uncertainty is something I have had to make peace with, and I won't pretend that peace came easily or that it's permanent. Some mornings I wake up and I am simply sad, and I allow myself to be sad, and then I get up and feed the birds and go out to the garden and keep going. What I know is this: I am 63 years old, and I am still here. My house is still mine. The savings I have rebuilt are not what they were, but they are growing, and they belong to no one but me. I have good friends and a church community and a vegetable garden that produced more zucchini last August than any one person could reasonably eat. I gave most of it away, which turned out to be its own kind of pleasure. I do not tell this story because I want sympathy, though I have learned to accept sympathy when it comes from a real place. I tell it because when I was sitting in that police station filling out forms, I felt profoundly alone. Like I had failed at something fundamental, like I should have known better, like the love I'd given my whole life had somehow produced this outcome and the fault line ran through me. I don't believe that anymore. You can love someone completely and raise them as well as you know how and still not be able to control who they choose to become. You can do everything right and still have something terrible happen to you. That is not failure. That is just the particular cruelty of loving people. They remain always themselves. What I can control is what I do next. And what I did next was stay standing. That, in the end, is the only victory that mattered to me. Not the restitution payments, not the plea agreement, not the title search that showed Cheryl's plans had collapsed before they started. Just this, that when my son called me on a Tuesday morning and told me everything I had worked for was gone, I sat down for an hour and then I got up. I got up and I made my calls, and I did not let grief turn me into someone who could be taken from again. That's what Walter would have wanted. And if I'm honest, it's what I wanted too. I just needed some time to remember it. There's a moment I keep coming back to. Not the phone call, not the police station, not the day I opened that lockbox. It's the morning after, sitting at my kitchen table with cold coffee, watching the cardinal come back to the feeder like nothing had happened, and thinking, how did we get here? I've turned that question over for a long time now, and what I've come to believe is that nothing about what happened was random. Every choice, Kevin's, Cheryl's, mine, had weight to it long before that Tuesday morning. Actions accumulate, silence accumulates. The moments where I saw something and looked away accumulated too. What I thought of as love and patience had, somewhere along the way, also become a kind of permission. Not because love is wrong, but because love without honesty is just a story we tell ourselves to avoid a harder conversation. Kevin didn't become someone capable of this overnight, and I didn't become someone willing to look the other way overnight either. There was a slow drift on both sides, away from the truth of who we were to each other. What the crisis forced me to do, what it cost me to do, was finally stop drifting and plant my feet. I think about Walter a lot when I'm working in the garden. He was not a man who talked much about right and wrong in the abstract. He just did things the right way, quietly, consistently, without needing credit for it. He set up that trust not because he was suspicious of anyone, but because he understood that character. Real character shows up in the unglamorous details, in the documents you file when no one's watching, in the thing you do for someone that they may not even know about until 20 years after you're gone. That is what I want to carry forward. Not the bitterness, not the legal outcome, not the satisfaction of being proven right. The thing I want to carry forward is the understanding that integrity isn't a grand gesture. It's a Tuesday morning decision. It's the choice to be honest when it's easier to look away. It's doing the careful, unglamorous thing because it's right, even when no one sees you doing it. And resilience, the kind that actually holds, isn't the absence of pain. I was devastated. I cried in Helen's kitchen. I lay awake for months. Resilience was getting up anyway, making the call anyway, signing the report anyway, even when my hand shook and part of me wanted to protect my son from the consequences of what he'd done to me. Going forward, one ordinary morning at a time, without waiting to feel ready, what I want for Kevin, and I do still want things for him, that hasn't changed, is that he finds his way to that same understanding before the cost gets higher. That he learns what his father knew, that you build a life with the daily choices no one applauds you for. That there is no version of a good life that runs through someone else's harm. I can't make him learn it. That part is his. What I can do is keep being someone who chose, when it mattered, to stay standing. To stay honest. To protect what was mine, not out of stubbornness, but out of self-respect. And to keep the light on, just in case the boy I raised ever fully finds his way back.